The morning mist clung to the Appalachian Mountains like a shroud as Sergeant Elena Rodriguez stepped onto the firing range at Fort Braxton, her weathered rifle case slung across her shoulder. The case looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a modern military facility, scarred leather with brass fittings that had turned green with age. Around her, 24 of America's finest marksmen were already setting up their equipment, the morning sun glinting off pristine carbon fiber, stocks and titanium barrels that cost more than most people's cars. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena had arrived at the Army's Elite Marksman Competition 3 days earlier, one of only 25 snipers selected from bases across the country. The competition was legendary in military circles, a grueling 2-week assessment that would determine who earned slots in the Army's most classified sniper units. These weren't just any soldiers. Each participant had already proven themselves exceptional, with confirmed kills in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and other theaters where American forces operated in the shadows. The competition attracted the military's most advanced shooters, men who spoke in reverent tones about their custom-built rifles worth $30,000, equipped with computerized scopes that could calculate wind speed, humidity, temperature, and even the Coriolis effect with the press of a button. They carried weapons that represented decades of technological advancement, firearms that could theoretically make hits at distances that would have seemed impossible just 20 years earlier. And then there was Elena Rodriguez, carefully removing from her ancient case a rifle that looked like it had been pulled from a World War II. Armory Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen was the first to notice her weapon as she began her assembly routine. He'd paused in adjusting his own precision rifle, a custom-built platform with a price tag that exceeded $50,000, to stare at what Elena was methodically putting together on the bench beside him. "Holy shit," Chen muttered, loud enough for the surrounding shooters to hear. "Is that a fucking museum piece?" The rifle Elena, assembled with practiced movements, was indeed ancient by modern standards. A 1943 Springfield M1903A4, the same model that had served American snipers in World War II and Korea. The wooden stock showed decades of careful maintenance but unmistakable wear. The scope, mounted on top, was a simple 2.5x magnification weaver, technology that most modern shooters would consider laughably primitive. There were no digital readouts, no ballistic computers, no rangefinders. Just glass, metal, and wood that had been crafted when her grandfather was fighting in the Pacific Theater. "Rodriguez," called out Captain Jake Morrison, approaching her station with the confident swagger of someone who'd never encountered a problem his technology couldn't solve. Morrison was one of the Army's golden boys, a West Point graduate with 3 combat deployments and a rifle setup that looked like something from a science fiction movie. "Please tell me you're not planning to compete with that antique." Elena continued her routine, checking the rifle's action with smooth, practiced movements that spoke of years of familiarity. She'd performed this same ritual thousands of times, first under her grandfather's watchful eye in the mountains of Colorado, later during her own military training, and now in combat zones where precision meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. "This rifle has been in my family for 3 generations, Elena replied calmly, not looking up from her work. "My grandfather carried it through Iwo Jima and Okinawa. My father used it in Vietnam. It served U.S. well." The comment drew more attention from nearby competitors. Sergeant First Class David Parker, a sniper with the 82nd Airborne, actually laughed out loud. "Lady, I've got a scope that costs more than your entire rifle. You realize this is a precision shooting competition, not a historical reenactment." Parker's weapon was indeed a marvel of modern engineering. His rifle featured a carbon fiber barrel that stayed perfectly stable regardless of temperature fluctuations, a computerized scope that could automatically adjust for environmental conditions, and a trigger system precise to fractions of an ounce. The weapon represented the pinnacle of 21st century sniper technology. Elena finally looked up from her rifle, meeting Parker's gaze with calm brown eyes that held depths he couldn't quite read. "Precision isn't about the technology," she said quietly. "It's about the person behind the weapon." The comment earned snorts of derision from several nearby shooters. They'd all invested heavily in their equipment, spending years learning to maximize every advantage their advanced systems could provide. The idea that someone could compete effectively with a rifle older than their grandparents seemed not just naive but almost insulting to their profession. "This isn't the Old West, Rodriguez," Morrison said, his tone carrying the patient condescension of someone explaining reality to a child. "Modern warfare requires modern solutions. That relic might have been adequate for shooting at targets 500 meters away, but we're talking about precision shots at distances exceeding 1 mile. Your grandfather's rifle simply isn't capable of that kind of accuracy." Elena smiled, slightly, an expression that held secrets Morrison couldn't begin to guess. "We'll see," she said simply, returning her attention to her equipment. The conversation had drawn the attention of Master Sergeant William Hayes, the competition's senior instructor and a legend in sniper circles. Hayes had spent 30 years in special operations with confirmed kills across 4 different conflicts. He'd seen every type of weapon system, trained with every advancement in sniper technology, and had strong opinions about what worked and what didn't. "Rodriguez," Hayes called out as he approached her station. "I've reviewed your file. Impressive kill count in Afghanistan. But I have to ask, why are you handicapping yourself with that museum piece when you could be using state-of-the-art equipment?" Elena paused in her preparation, considering how to answer. The truth was more complicated than these men could understand, rooted in family tradition and hard-learned lessons that couldn't be quantified in technical specifications. "This rifle taught me everything I know about shooting," she finally said. "My grandfather used to say that a true marksman doesn't need technology to make accurate shots. Technology should enhance skill, not replace it." Hayes nodded slowly, though his expression remained skeptical. "Noble sentiment, Sergeant. But noble sentiments don't win competitions or complete missions. These other competitors have invested years learning to maximize every advantage their equipment provides. You're going to be at a significant disadvantage." Around them, the other competitors continued setting up their systems, occasionally glancing over at Elena's station with mixtures of amusement and disbelief. The contrast was stark. Their rifles looked like something from a military contractor's catalog, bristling with accessories and technological enhancements, while hers looked like it belonged in a display case commemorating past conflicts. Sergeant Tommy Walsh, a Marine sniper with 2 Purple Hearts, shook his head as he watched Elena's preparation routine. "I've got nothing but respect for military tradition," he said to Chun, loud enough for Elena to hear. "But this is about results, not nostalgia. That rifle might have been cutting edge in 1943, but it's 2024 now. She's going to get embarrassed." The comments weren't malicious, exactly. These were professional soldiers who respected competence and dedication. But they'd also invested heavily in their equipment and training, and many of them genuinely believed that Elena was making a mistake that would not only hurt her own performance but potentially waste a slot that could have gone to someone better. Equipped for success, Elena understood their perspective. She'd faced similar reactions throughout her military career, first when she'd insisted on keeping her grandfather's rifle despite having access to modern equipment, later when she'd consistently outperformed expectations despite using what others considered obsolete technology. The truth was that Elena Rodriguez had grown up differently than most snipers. While other marksmen learned their craft in military training programs, focused on modern equipment and standardized techniques, Elena had been raised by a grandfather who believed that fundamental skills mattered more than technological advantages. Miguel Rodriguez had returned from World War II with strong opinions about marksmanship and an even stronger belief that shortcuts led to failure. He'd spent Elena's childhood teaching her to read wind by watching grass movement, to judge distance by understanding how atmospheric conditions affected visual perception, and to control her breathing and trigger squeeze with mechanical precision that didn't depend on electronic assistance. Technology fails, her grandfather had told her countless times during their sessions in the Colorado mountains. Batteries die, computers malfunction, sophisticated equipment breaks down in field conditions. But if you understand the fundamentals, if you truly know your weapon and trust your skills, you can make accurate shots under any circumstances. Those lessons had been drilled into Elena through thousands of rounds fired under varying conditions. She'd learned to compensate for wind manually, to calculate holdovers based on experience rather than digital readouts, and to maintain accuracy. Levels that impressed even experienced instructors, who couldn't understand how she achieved such consistency with such basic equipment. But explaining this to competitors who'd invested years mastering advanced technology seemed pointless. They'd see the results soon enough. As the morning progressed and competitors continued their preparations, Elena became increasingly aware of the attention her rifle drew. Conversations would pause when she walked past, followed by whispered discussions about her equipment choice. Some competitors seemed genuinely concerned that she was unprepared for the competition's challenges. Others appeared amused by what they perceived as naive overconfidence. "Check this out," she overheard Walsh saying to a group of shooters near the equipment table. "Rodriguez thinks she's going to compete with a rifle that probably saw action at Normandy. I mean, I respect history, but this isn't a museum exhibition." The comment stung slightly, not because Elena doubted her abilities, but because it revealed how little these accomplished soldiers understood about what actually made the difference in precision shooting. They'd become so focused on technological solutions that they'd forgotten the human element remained paramount. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message from her grandmother. "Thinking about you today, Mia. Your grandfather would be proud to see his rifle in competition again. Trust your training." The message reminded Elena why she was here. This wasn't about proving anything to skeptical competitors or validating her equipment choices. This was about honoring a family tradition while pursuing excellence in her chosen profession. Her grandfather's rifle had earned its reputation through performance, not marketing. Today would simply be another chapter in that story. Master Sergeant Hayes called the competitors to attention for the competition briefing. 25 snipers gathered around a large topographical map that showed the Fort Braxton training area, 30 square miles of challenging terrain that would test every aspect of their skills over the next 2 weeks. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Gentlemen," Hayes began, then caught himself. "And lady, you represent the finest marksman our military has produced. Over the next 14 days, you'll face challenges designed to push your skills, equipment, and decision-making abilities to their absolute limits." He gestured to the map, pointing out various locations marked with colored pins. Long range, precision shots at distances up to 1,800 meters, moving targets under combat conditions, low-light engagements using night vision equipment, urban warfare scenarios with civilians present, environmental challenges including wind, rain, and temperature extremes. Elena studied the map carefully, noting elevation changes and potential wind patterns. Her grandfather had taught her too. READ, terrain like a book, understanding how geographical features would affect bullet flight paths and shooting conditions. "Competition scoring is cumulative," Hayes continued. "Miss your targets, take too long to engage, or make tactical errors, and you'll be eliminated. Only the top 8 shooters will advance to the final phase, where you'll face scenarios designed to simulate actual special operations missions. The briefing continued with technical details about ammunition allowances, equipment restrictions, and safety protocols. Elena listened carefully while part of her attention remained focused on the conversations happening around her. 1,800 meters, Chung was whispering to Morrison. There's no way that World War II rifle can maintain accuracy at that distance. The ballistics just don't work. Morrison nodded agreement. Even if she's a decent shot, she's going to be severely limited by her equipment. This competition is about pushing boundaries, and you can't do that with technology from the 1940s. Elena almost smiled. If only they knew about the shots she'd made in Afghanistan with this same rifle, engaging targets at distances that would surprise them. But those missions remained classified, and she had no intention of discussing them with competitors, who'd already decided what she was capable of. As the briefing concluded and competitors began moving toward the first shooting station, Elena performed one final check of her rifle. The familiar weight felt perfect in her hands, balanced and responsive in ways that no amount of modern technology could replicate. This weapon had been crafted by artisans who understood that accuracy depended on mechanical precision, not electronic assistance. The first challenge was a cold bore shot, a single round fired at a target 600 meters away, with no warm-up shots allowed. Cold bore accuracy was considered one of the most important tests of both equipment and shooter skill, since it replicated the conditions most likely to be encountered in actual combat situations. Elena watched as the first competitor, a Special Forces sniper named Jackson, took his position. His rifle was a marvel of engineering, worth more than most people's cars, equipped with a scope that could automatically adjust for environmental conditions. Jackson spent several minutes consulting his ballistic computer, making precise adjustments to his scope settings based on current temperature, humidity, and wind readings. His shot when it came was excellent, a hit just outside the 10 ring. At 600 meters, the assembled competitors nodded approvingly. Jackson's equipment and training had produced exactly the kind of result expected from elite military marksmen. 5 more shooters took their turns, each producing respectable results with their advanced equipment. Hits clustered around the target center, demonstrating the accuracy achievable when cutting-edge technology was paired with skilled operators. Then Elena's name was called. She approached the firing line carrying her grandfather's rifle, conscious of the attention focused on her from both competitors and instructors. The ancient weapon looked almost primitive compared to the high-tech systems that had preceded it, but Elena felt only confidence as she settled into her shooting position. Unlike the previous shooters, Elena didn't consult any electronic devices or ballistic computers. Instead, she spent several moments studying the range through her simple 2.5x scope, watching grass movement to gauge wind direction and intensity, observing mirage patterns that revealed air density conditions. Her grandfather had taught her to read these natural indicators, to understand how environmental factors would affect bullet flight without relying on technological assistance. The knowledge had been earned through thousands of practice rounds and refined through combat experience in some of the world's most challenging shooting environments. Elena settled behind her rifle, controlling her breathing as she'd been taught since childhood. The target appeared clearly through her simple scope, a black circle surrounded by scoring rings, seemingly impossibly small at 600 meters distance. The range fell silent as she prepared to fire. Even the skeptical competitors wanted to see what would happen when decades-old technology met modern competition standards. Elena exhaled slowly, feeling her heartbeat settle into the rhythm her grandfather had taught her to recognize. At the natural pause between breaths, when her body was perfectly still, she squeezed the trigger with steady pressure that had been refined through years of practice. The rifle cracked, and 600 meters away, the target showed a perfect hit, dead center in the 10 ring. The silence stretched for several seconds, Before Master Sergeant Hayes called out the score through his spotting scope, Rodriguez, 10 ring center. Perfect score. Elena stood and shouldered her rifle, offering. No reaction to the murmurs of surprise from the assembled competitors. It was exactly the result she'd expected, the same accuracy she'd demonstrated countless times in training and combat. But as she walked back from the firing line, she could hear the conversations beginning around her, and she knew that everything had just changed. The second day of competition brought Elena's first real taste of organized resistance. What had begun as casual mockery and skeptical comments had evolved into something more deliberate and systematic. The other competitors had spent the previous evening analyzing her perfect cold bore shot, and their conclusions weren't flattering to their own assumptions. "Lucky shot," Sergeant First Class Parker announced loudly as Elena arrived at the morning equipment check. 600 meters isn't exactly challenging for someone at this level. Let's see how that museum piece performs when the distances get serious. Elena methodically laid out her cleaning kit beside her rifle case, beginning the daily maintenance routine her grandfather had drilled into her since childhood. Every component would be inspected, cleaned, and verified before the day's challenges began. It was a process that took her nearly 30 minutes, compared to the 5-minute digital diagnostics most competitors ran on their computerized systems. Captain Morrison watched her routine with poorly concealed impatience. "Rodriguez, you realize, we've got actual shooting to do today. Some of us don't need to spend an hour babying our equipment." The comment drew chuckles from several nearby competitors, but Elena continued her methodical inspection. She'd learned early that proper maintenance wasn't just about reliability. It was about understanding every component of her weapon system so completely that she could predict its behavior under any conditions. Master Sergeant Hayes approached with the day's challenge briefing. "Today we're testing long-range precision under adverse conditions. Targets at 800, 1,000, and 1,200 meters. Wind gusting to 25 miles per hour, with rain expected this afternoon." Elena glanced at the weather reports displayed on Hayes's tablet. The conditions would be challenging for any shooter, but especially difficult for those relying heavily on electronic systems that could be affected by moisture and rapid environmental changes. Additionally, Hayes continued, ammunition will be limited. 3 rounds per target, maximum. Miss all 3, and you're eliminated from the competition. The announcement created visible tension among the competitors. Limited ammunition meant no opportunity for ranging shots or adjustments based on impact observations. Each shooter would need to calculate their solutions correctly on the first attempt, leaving no margin for error. Sergeant Walsh studied his ballistic computer, inputting the environmental data Hayes had provided. 1,200 meters in these conditions is going to push equipment to its limits, he muttered to Chun. Thank God for modern technology. Elena had no ballistic computer to consult, no digital wind meter to provide precise measurements. Instead, she walked to the edge of the range and spent several minutes observing natural indicators, the movement of grass at various distances, the behavior of dust particles in the air, the way heat mirage patterns shifted across the landscape. "What's she doing?" asked Lieutenant Sarah Kim, one of only 2 other women in the competition. Kim carried a precision rifle worth $40,000, equipped with a scope that could automatically adjust for atmospheric conditions. "Probably trying to figure out how to use that antique without embarrassing herself," Morrison replied. "Look, I respect military tradition, but this is about performance. She's going to struggle once we get to serious distances." The first shooter approached the 1,000-meter line. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez from the 75th Ranger Regiment spent nearly 10 minutes consulting his digital systems, cross-referencing atmospheric data with ballistic calculations. His first shot missed the target entirely, the bullet impacting several feet to the right. His second shot clipped the edge of the scoring area for minimal points. His third shot achieved a decent hit in the 7 ring. Tough conditions, Hayes observed as Rodriguez cleared the firing line. The wind's shifting faster than most systems can compensate for. 3 more shooters attempted the 1,000-meter challenge with similar results. The rapidly changing wind conditions were proving too dynamic for electronic systems that required time to process atmospheric data and calculate solutions. By the time their computers provided firing solutions, the conditions had already changed. Elena's turn arrived as the first raindrops began falling. She approached the firing line carrying her grandfather's rifle, the wooden stock already showing moisture from the humid air. Unlike the previous shooters, she'd made no equipment adjustments, consulted no digital readouts. "This should be interesting," Parker commented to Walsh. "Let's see how well that World War II technology handles modern challenges." Elena settled into her shooting position, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle against her shoulder. Through her simple 2.5x scope, the target appeared as a small dark circle at the extreme edge of clear resolution. The rain was beginning to fall more steadily, creating additional complications for long-range accuracy. She spent several moments reading the wind, not through electronic instruments, but through years of experience observing how environmental conditions affected bullet flight. The wind was indeed gusting and shifting, but it followed patterns that could be predicted if you understood what to look for. Her grandfather had taught her that weather systems behaved according to physical laws, not random chance. Wind patterns were influenced by terrain features, temperature differentials, and atmospheric pressure, all factors that could be observed and analyzed without technological assistance. Elena made her holdover adjustments based on experience, rather than calculations, compensating for wind drift using techniques her grandfather had learned in combat 70 years earlier. The methods were old, but they were based on physics that hadn't changed since bullets were invented. Her first shot echoed across the range. Through his spotting scope, Hayes watched the impact appear in the target's 9 ring, slightly left of center. An excellent shot under the challenging conditions, but not perfect. Elena's second shot followed 30 seconds later, after she'd observed how the wind had affected her first bullet's flight path. This time the impact appeared in the 10 ring, just outside dead center. For her third shot, Elena waited nearly 2 minutes, watching the wind patterns shift across the range. When the conditions stabilized briefly, she fired. The bullet struck dead center in the 10 ring, a perfect shot at 1,000 meters in gusting wind and rain. The range fell silent except for the sound of raindrops hitting equipment. Hayes verified the score through his spotting scope before announcing, "Rodriguez, 9 ring, 10 ring, 10 ring center. Highest score of the day." Elena stood and shouldered her rifle without celebration or acknowledgement of the murmurs spreading among the competitors. It was the result she'd expected based on her reading of the conditions, achieved using techniques that were old when their grandparents were born. But instead of earning respect, her performance seemed to increase the hostility from some quarters. As she walked back from the firing line, Elena overheard Morrison's conversation with several other competitors. "There's something not right here," Morrison was saying, his voice low but audible. "Nobody shoots that accurately with equipment. That primitive, not under these conditions." "What are you suggesting?" asked Chun. "I'm suggesting that maybe Rodriguez knows something about this range that we don't. Maybe she's been here before, had time to prepare specifically for these challenges." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Elena felt her jaw tighten as she realized what Morrison was implying, that her success was due to unfair advantage rather than skill and preparation. Walsh joined the conversation, his voice carrying the authority of someone with multiple combat deployments. "Morrison's got a point. I've never seen anyone make shots like that with such basic equipment. Either she's the best natural shooter in military history, or something's off." Elena wanted to respond, to explain that her accuracy came from decades of training and combat experience, not insider knowledge or unfair preparation. But military protocol dictated that she remain silent unless directly questioned by an instructor. Accusations gained momentum as the day progressed. During the 1,200-meter challenge, Elena continued her consistent performance while other competitors struggled with the extreme conditions. Her shots clustered tightly in the target's center, achieved with a rifle that most experts considered inadequate for such distances. "Check her ammunition," she heard Parker suggest to Hayes during a break between shooters. "Maybe she's using custom loads that give her an advantage." Hayes approached Elena's equipment station, where her ammunition lay neatly arranged in its original military packaging. Standard M72 match ammunition, identical to what every other competitor was using. Nothing special, nothing modified, nothing that could explain her accuracy advantage. "Mind if I examine your rifle, Rodriguez?" Hayes asked, his tone professional but skeptical. Elena handed over her grandfather's Springfield without objection. Hayes spent several minutes inspecting the weapon, checking the scope mounts, examining the barrel crown, testing the trigger pull. Everything was exactly as it appeared. A well-maintained but fundamentally standard rifle from 1943. "I don't understand it," Hayes muttered, returning the rifle to Elena. "This weapon shouldn't be capable of the accuracy you're demonstrating. The technology just isn't there." "Technology isn't everything, Sergeant," Elena replied quietly. "My grandfather used to say that the most important component of any weapon system is the person behind the trigger." Hayes shook his head. "I've been doing this for 30 years, Rodriguez. I know what's possible and what isn't. No offense, but what you're accomplishing with that equipment defies everything I understand about ballistics and precision shooting." The skepticism was becoming more organized and vocal. During the afternoon meal break, Elena found herself eating alone while groups of competitors gathered at other tables, their conversations frequently turning to her performance. "It's not personal," Lieutenant Kim said, approaching Elena's table. "But some of the guys are starting to think there's something we're not seeing. Your scores are just too good for the equipment you're using." Elena looked up from her meal. "Have any of them considered that maybe their assumptions about equipment capabilities are wrong?" Kim sat down across from her, lowering her voice. "Look, I want women to succeed in these roles. But if there's some kind of advantage you're not disclosing, it's going to hurt all of us when it comes out." The implication stung worse than the open hostility. Elena was being accused not just of cheating, but of potentially damaging opportunities for other women in combat roles. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier than any rifle she'd ever carried. "There's no advantage," Elena said firmly. "Just training and experience with this particular weapon system." Kim's expression remained skeptical. "Elena, I've got a rifle that costs more than most people's cars, equipped with technology that can calculate solutions faster than any human. You're outperforming me with equipment from World War II. That doesn't make sense." Elena wanted to explain about the hours she'd spent learning to read wind patterns, about the combat experience that had taught her to make split-second adjustments under pressure, about the family tradition that had given her insights into marksmanship that couldn't be purchased or programmed. But explaining seemed pointless when the fundamental assumptions about modern superiority were so deeply ingrained. The afternoon brought the most challenging test yet, moving targets at varying distances while shooters remained stationary. The exercise simulated combat conditions, where enemies might be repositioning while snipers engaged from concealed positions. Elena watched as competitors struggled with the challenge. Their sophisticated scopes and ballistic computers, optimized for stationary targets, proved less effective when required to track moving objects while calculating lead times and trajectory adjustments in real time. Morrison's first shot at a moving target missed entirely, his computer-calculated solution failing to account for the target's erratic movement pattern. His second shot clipped the target's edge for minimal points. His third shot missed again as frustration affected his shooting technique. "Fucking technology," Morrison cursed as he cleared the firing line. "These conditions are outside normal parameters." Elena approached the moving target challenge with different techniques entirely. Instead of trying to calculate precise solutions, she relied on instinctive shooting methods her grandfather had taught her, techniques developed in combat situations. Where split-second timing mattered more than mathematical precision, her first shot struck the moving target center mass. Her second shot hit slightly left of center as the target changed direction unexpectedly. Her third shot was again dead center, timed perfectly to intersect the target's movement pattern. "Rodriguez, 3 hits, 2 center mass," Has announced, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. Perfect score on moving targets. The achievement was too much for Morrison's patience. As Elena walked back from the firing line, he confronted her directly. "All right, Rodriguez, enough games. Nobody shoots like that with a rifle from the 1940s. What's your secret? Special ammunition? Modified components? Inside knowledge of the thaw? Targets?" Elena met his stare steadily. "No secret, Captain. Just training and experience." "Bullshit," Morrison snapped. "I've got 20 years of experience and equipment worth more than your annual salary. You don't outshoot me with a museum piece unless something's rigged." The confrontation drew attention from other competitors and instructors. Elena found herself at the center of a circle of hostile faces, all demanding explanations for performance. That challenged their fundamental beliefs about modern military capabilities. "Maybe we should inspect her equipment more thoroughly," suggested Walsh. "Check for modifications that aren't immediately obvious. Maybe we should test her with different ammunition," added Parker. "See if she can maintain that accuracy with randomly selected rounds." Elena felt the weight of their suspicion and hostility pressing down on her like a physical force. These were accomplished soldiers, men and women she respected, but they couldn't accept that their expensive technology might not represent the ultimate solution to every challenge. Master Sergeant Hayes raised his hand for silence. "That's enough. Speculation, people. Rodriguez has submitted to equipment inspections and is using standard ammunition. Her performance speaks for itself. Then how do you explain it?" Morrison demanded. "How does someone outshoot precision rifles with a weapon? That belongs in a museum?" Hayes looked at Elena for a long moment before answering. "I don't explain it, Captain. I just record the scores." But Elena could see in Hayes's expression that even the senior instructor harbored doubts about what he was witnessing. The performance was so far outside normal expectations that rational explanations seemed insufficient. As the competitors dispersed for evening equipment maintenance, Elena overheard the conversations that would continue long into the night. Theories about her success ranged from equipment modifications to prior familiarity with the range to suggestions that she was somehow receiving unauthorized assistance. Nobody considered the possibility that their assumptions about technological superiority might be fundamentally flawed. Elena cleaned her grandfather's rifle with the same methodical care she'd shown every day of the competition. Each component inspected and maintained according to standards learned decades earlier. The weapon that others saw as primitive and inadequate felt perfectly balanced in her hands, responsive and reliable in ways that transcended specifications or price tags. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and fresh opportunities for her critics to find explanations that didn't require them to question their basic beliefs about modern military capabilities. But Elena knew something they didn't understand yet. The real test was still coming. By the beginning of week 2, Elena Rodriguez had become a pariah. The mess hall conversation stopped when she approached tables. Equipment areas cleared when she arrived for her daily maintenance routine. Even the instructors had begun treating her with a professional distance that felt more like quarantine than military courtesy. The turning point had come. 3 Days earlier during a night vision exercise, Elena had achieved perfect scores using iron sights and a simple red dot scope, while other competitors struggled with their advanced thermal and infrared systems. The performance was so far outside expected parameters that Master Sergeant Hayes had quietly requested a formal review of her background and equipment. "Rodriguez," Hayes called out as Elena prepared for the morning's briefing. "I need to see you in my office before we begin today's challenges." Elena followed Hayes into the administrative building, past walls lined with photographs of distinguished graduates from previous competitions. The office itself was spartanly furnished, a metal desk, 2 chairs, and filing cabinets that contained records of every elite sniper who had passed through Fort Braxton's programs. Hayes gestured for Elena to sit, then pulled out a thick folder that she recognized as her personnel file. "I've spent the weekend reviewing your record, Rodriguez. Combat deployments in Afghanistan, confirmed kills in challenging conditions, commendations for accuracy under fire, impressive service record." Elena waited, sensing that praise wasn't the purpose of this meeting. "But I've also been reviewing the technical specifications of your weapon system," Hayes continued, opening a second folder containing ballistic data and equipment analysis. "According to every expert I've consulted, what you're accomplishing shouldn't be possible with that rifle. Sergeant, with respect, experts can be wrong about equipment capabilities." Hayes leaned back in his chair, studying Elena with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle that defied logical solution. "Rodriguez, I've been training snipers for longer than you've been alive. I understand what's possible and what isn't. Your grandfather's rifle is a fine weapon for its era, but it lacks the precision tolerances necessary for the accuracy you're demonstrating." Elena felt a familiar weight settling in her chest, the burden of explaining something that couldn't be understood without experiencing it firsthand. "My grandfather taught me that precision comes from understanding your weapon completely, not from relying on technology to compensate for lack of skill." "Your grandfather was a hell of a soldier," Hayes acknowledged. "I've read his service record, too, but Elena, the laws of physics haven't changed since World War II. Bullet drop, wind drift, scope limitations, these are mathematical realities that can't be overcome through training alone." Elena stared at her hands, trying to find words that would bridge the gap between Hayes's technical knowledge and her practical experience. "Sergeant, have you ever considered that maybe those mathematical models don't account for every variable? That there might be techniques and knowledge that aren't captured in modern ballistic computers?" Hayes was quiet for a long moment, then pulled out a third folder that made Elena's stomach drop. "Rodriguez, I've received formal complaints from 7 competitors alleging that you're using authorized equipment or techniques. They're requesting a comprehensive investigation." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Formal complaints meant official scrutiny, potential disqualification, and quite possibly the end of her military career if any impropriety was discovered. More importantly, it meant that her fellow soldiers, people she'd hoped to serve alongside, had decided she was a cheater rather than simply an unexpected performer. "What kind of investigation?" Elena asked quietly. "Complete equipment analysis by military technical experts. Ammunition testing to verify you're using standard loads. Background check to ensure you haven't had unauthorized access to range information or target specifications. Interview with your previous commanders to verify your claimed experience." Levels. Each item on Hayes's list felt like another nail being driven into a coffin. Elena knew the investigation would find nothing improper because there was nothing improper to find. But the process itself would brand her as suspect, marking her permanently as someone whose achievements required explanation rather than recognition. "How long will this take?" Elena asked. "Could be weeks, maybe months if they decide to dig deep into your training history and family background." Hayes leaned forward, his expression softening slightly. "Elena, I'm going to give you some advice as someone who's seen a lot of careers rise and fall in this business. Sometimes the smart play is to withdraw gracefully before things get ugly. Elena looked up sharply. You're suggesting I quit? I'm suggesting you consider whether winning this competition is worth the scrutiny and controversy it's going to bring. Even if the investigation clears you completely, there will always be people who believe something was irregular about your performance. The suggestion hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Elena realized that Hayes, despite his professional demeanor, had already decided she was somehow cheating. The investigation was just a formality before her inevitable disqualification. I'm not withdrawing, Elena said firmly. I've done nothing wrong, and I'm not going to quit because other people can't accept that their assumptions might be incorrect. Hayes nodded, though his expression suggested he'd expected that response. Then you should know that starting today, you'll have an observer assigned to monitor your equipment preparation and shooting procedures. Technical Sergeant Collins from the Marksmanship Unit will be documenting everything you do. Elena felt her isolation become complete. Not only were her fellow competitors convinced she was cheating, but now she'd have an official watchdog ensuring that every aspect of her performance was scrutinized and recorded. Is there anything else, Sergeant? Just this, Hayes said, his voice carrying genuine concern. Elena, I've seen good soldiers destroy their careers over pride. Sometimes the wisest course is to step back and find another way forward. Elena stood and moved toward the door, then paused. Sergeant, my grandfather didn't survive Iwo Jima by stepping back when things got difficult. Neither will I. Technical Sergeant Collins was waiting outside the administrative building when Elena emerged. A thin, precise man with wire-rimmed glasses and a clipboard, Collins looked like he'd stepped out of a laboratory rather than a military training facility. Sergeant Rodriguez, I'm Technical Sergeant Collins. I'll be observing your procedures for the remainder of the competition. Elena nodded acknowledgement, though the formal introduction felt more like being read her rights than meeting a colleague. Collins followed Elena to the equipment area, maintaining careful distance while documenting every aspect of her rifle maintenance. Routine. He photographed her cleaning kit, measured her ammunition with calipers, and even collected samples of her rifle oil for later analysis. Is this really necessary? Elena asked as Collins photographed the inside of her rifle case. Standard procedure for equipment investigations, Collins replied without looking up from his documentation. We need to establish a complete baseline of your equipment and procedures. The morning's challenge was precision shooting at extreme range, 1,500 meters in variable wind conditions. Elena had been looking forward to the test, eager to demonstrate that her grandfather's rifle could compete at distances most experts considered impossible for World War II technology. But as she prepared for her shots under Collins's scrutiny, Elena became acutely aware of every gesture being recorded and analyzed. The natural rhythm she'd developed over years of practice felt stilted and artificial under constant observation. Can you explain why you're not using a ballistic computer for distance calculations? Collins asked, making notes on his clipboard. I calculate holds based on experience and observation, Elena replied, continuing her pre-shot routine. Can you be more specific about your calculation methodology? Elena paused, realizing that Collins was asking her to explain techniques that had been developed through intuition and practice rather than formal mathematical analysis. I observe environmental conditions and adjust my point of aim based on previous experience with similar conditions. Collins frowned. That's not really a methodology, Sergeant. That's just guessing. The comment stung because it reflected exactly what her competitors believed about her performance, that she was somehow getting lucky through imprecise techniques. That shouldn't work consistently. Elena's first shot at 1,500 meters struck the target's 8 ring, a respectable hit, but not the perfection she'd been achieving. Her second shot was also slightly off-center, landing in the 9 ring. The pressure of constant scrutiny was affecting her natural shooting rhythm. For her third shot, Elena forced herself to ignore Collins's presence and return to the techniques her grandfather had taught her. She spent several minutes reading wind patterns, observing heat mirage effects, and allowing her breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. The shot felt perfect as it broke, and 1,500 meters away the target showed a 10-ring hit dead center. "Interesting," Collins muttered, making extensive notes. "Your accuracy improved significantly when you took more time for preparation." Elena wanted to explain that the time hadn't been about preparation, but about returning to her natural shooting rhythm. But Collins's clinical approach to her techniques made explanation seem pointless. During the lunch break, Elena found herself eating alone while groups of competitors discussed her performance and the ongoing investigation. The conversations weren't particularly quiet, and Elena could hear every speculation about her equipment and methods. "Collins is documenting everything," Morrison was telling a group near the beverage station. "If there's any kind of modification or unauthorized technique, they'll find it." "I still don't understand how someone shoots that accurately with such primitive equipment," added Walsh. "The scope alone should limit her effective range to 800 meters maximum." Lieutenant Kim approached Elena's isolated table, her expression a mixture of sympathy and continued suspicion. "Elena, how are you holding up?" "Fine," Elena replied, though the word felt hollow. Kim sat down uninvited. "Look, I know this situation is difficult, but maybe it's for the best. If there's some technique or knowledge that you're using, sharing it could help all of us improve." Elena looked up from her meal. "What if there's no secret, Sarah? What if the technique is just thousands of hours of practice with one specific weapon system?" "Then prove it," Kim said earnestly. "Explain your method so Collins can document them properly. Show everyone that what you're doing can be taught and replicated." Elena realized that Kim, despite her apparent sympathy, still believed there had to be some hidden explanation for her performance. The idea that someone could outperform modern technology through traditional methods was simply too challenging to accept. "Some things can't be easily explained," Elena said quietly. "They have to be experienced." Kim's expression hardened slightly. "Elena, that sounds like you're saying your techniques are some kind of mystical secret that only you understand. That's not helping your credibility." The conversation ended when Collins approached with his clipboard and camera. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I need to document your afternoon equipment preparation. The review board wants detailed photographs of your scope adjustments." Elena followed Collins back to the equipment area, where her rifle case had been cordoned off with tape like a crime scene. Other competitors watched from a distance as Collins directed Elena through a methodical documentation process that turned her normal routine into an awkward performance. "Can you explain why you're making that particular scope adjustment?" Collins asked as Elena made a minor windage correction. "Wind conditions have shifted since this morning," Elena replied. "Can you quantify that shift in measurable units?" Elena paused, realizing that Collins wanted mathematical precision for adjustments she made based on intuitive observation. "The wind has increased by approximately 5 miles per hour and shifted 15 degrees to the south." Collins made notes, then pulled out a digital wind meter. "Current conditions show wind at 12 miles per hour from the southwest. Your estimates appear to be imprecise." Elena felt frustration building. Her adjustments weren't based on precise measurements, but on understanding how changing conditions would affect her specific rifle's behavior. The digital readings Collins preferred provided data, but not the contextual understanding necessary for accurate shooting. The afternoon's challenge involved shooting through simulated urban environments, with targets positioned between building facades and around obstacles that blocked direct lines of sight. The exercise required shooters to calculate ricochet angles and use reflected shots to engage targets that couldn't be hit directly. Elena watched as competitor after competitor struggled with the challenge. Their sophisticated scopes and ballistic computers, optimized for direct fire solutions, provided little assistance for the complex geometry required to calculate ricochet trajectories. Morrison's attempts resulted in complete misses, as his computed solutions failed to account for the unpredictable behavior of bullets, deflecting off concrete and steel surfaces. Walsh managed one marginal hit through luck rather than calculation. Chun couldn't even attempt the shots, declaring the challenge impossible with standard ammunition. Elena approached the urban shooting problem with techniques her grandfather had developed during street fighting in Manila. Instead of trying to calculate precise ricochet angles, she relied on understanding how bullets behaved when they encountered different materials at various angles. Her first ricochet shot struck the target center mass. Her second shot, requiring deflection off two surfaces, hit slightly off-center, but still within the scoring area. Her third shot, the most complex trajectory of the exercise, found its mark perfectly. Rodriguez, 3 hits on ricochet targets, Hayes announced, his voice carrying undisguised amazement. No other competitor has achieved more than 1 hit. The performance was too much for the assembled group. Elena could hear angry conversations erupting around her as competitors struggled to understand how someone using primitive equipment could master challenges that defeated their advanced systems. "This is impossible," Morrison declared loudly. "Nobody calculates ricochet angles accurately without computer assistance. There has to be something we're not seeing." Collins was furiously documenting Elena's shooting position, photographing angles and measuring distances in an apparent attempt to reverse engineer her technique. But Elena knew that no amount of measurement could capture the intuitive understanding her grandfather had passed down through years of patient instruction. As the day's challenges concluded, Elena found herself completely isolated from her fellow competitors. The investigation had transformed her from a surprising performer into a suspected cheater, and her continued success only deepened their conviction that something improper was occurring. Elena packed her grandfather's rifle with the same care she'd shown every day, but the familiar routine felt different under Collins's constant observation. Every movement was being recorded and analyzed, turning a private ritual into a public performance. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Collins said as she prepared to leave the range, "the review board wants to interview you tomorrow morning before the competition continues. They have some questions about your training background and methods." Elena nodded, understanding that the formal interrogation was about to begin. Tomorrow she would face questions designed to find inconsistencies in her story, gaps in her knowledge, or admissions that might explain her unexpected performance. But tonight, alone in her quarters, Elena opened her grandfather's combat diary and read again the words that had sustained her through every challenge. "The rifle doesn't make the marksman, Mia. The marksman makes the rifle." She was about to discover just how much faith she had in that philosophy. Walking back to her quarters, Elena noticed that other competitors avoided making eye contact. Conversations stopped when she passed groups. In the hallways, even the instructors maintained professional distance that felt more like suspicion than respect. Elena Rodriguez had achieved everything she'd set out to accomplish at Fort Braxton, but instead of earning recognition, she'd gained only isolation and doubt. Tomorrow would determine whether her grandfather's lessons were strong enough to survive the scrutiny of a military system that couldn't accept what it couldn't explain. The investigation that was supposed to clear her name was about to become the final test of everything she believed about marksmanship, tradition, and the courage to stand alone when everyone else demanded conformity. The emergency alert pierced through Fort Braxton at 0347 hours, jolting Elena from uneasy sleep. Red lights flashed in the barracks corridors as the base-wide announcement crackled through speakers. "All personnel to designated emergency stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Elena grabbed her gear and sprinted toward the assembly area, her grandfather's rifle case bouncing against her back. Around her, other competitors emerged from buildings in various states of readiness, their expensive equipment hastily gathered in the pre-dawn darkness. Master Sergeant Hayes stood at the center of a cluster of military vehicles, their headlights cutting through the darkness as he briefed a group of senior officers. Elena could see maps spread across the hood of a Humvee, marked with red zones that indicated something had gone seriously wrong. "Listen up." Hayes's voice carried across the assembly area as the competitors gathered around him. At 0315 hours, a military transport aircraft carrying 47 personnel went down in the mountains 12 miles northeast of here. Weather conditions have grounded all rescue helicopters, and ground teams can't reach the crash site before nightfall. Elena felt her pulse quicken. This wasn't a training exercise or competition challenge. Real lives were at stake. Hayes continued, his expression grim. However, there are hostile forces in the area, a militia group that's been tracking military movements. Intelligence suggests they're moving toward the crash site to capture survivors or eliminate witnesses. We need to establish overwatch positions to protect the crash site until rescue teams can reach it. Captain Morrison stepped forward. "Sir, what about the competition?" "We're not equipped for actual combat operations." "The competition is suspended," Hayes replied sharply. "Right now you're not competitors, you're soldiers, and 47 of our people need protection." Elena studied the topographical map Hayes was indicating. The crash site was positioned in a valley surrounded by elevated terrain that offered multiple sniper positions. But the distances involved were extreme. Some potential shooting positions were over 2,000 meters from areas where hostile forces might approach. "The mission is simple," Hayes explained. "Teams of 2 will deploy to observation posts around the crash site perimeter. Your job is to provide early warning of hostile approaches, and if necessary, engage threats at long range to buy time for the survivors." Elena raised her hand. "Sergeant, what's the maximum engagement distance we might be looking at?" Hayes consulted his map. "Worst case scenario, you could be shooting at targets over 2,500 meters away. These are extreme distances even for your advanced equipment." Elena heard murmurs of concern from the other competitors. 2,500 meters was at the absolute limit of what most modern sniper systems could achieve under perfect conditions. In mountainous terrain with variable wind and limited visibility, such shots would be nearly impossible. "Sir," Morrison sighed, "maybe Rodriguez should sit this one out. If we're talking about real-world consequences, we need shooters with proven equipment." The suggestion hit Elena like a slap. Even in a life-or-death situation, Morrison was still questioning her capabilities. "Captain Morrison," Hayes's voice carried a sharp edge, "every qualified shooter deploys, period." Technical Sergeant Collins appeared beside Elena with his ever-present clipboard. "Sir, what about the ongoing investigation? Shouldn't Sergeant Rodriguez remain under observation?" Hayes looked at Collins with barely concealed disgust. "Sergeant, 47 lives are more important than your paperwork. The investigation is suspended until this mission is complete." Elena felt a surge of gratitude toward Hayes, even though she knew his support was based on necessity rather than confidence in her abilities. Teams were assigned rapidly. Elena found herself paired with Lieutenant Kim, despite the tension that had developed between them during the investigation. Kim carried her $40,000 precision rifle and enough electronic equipment to stock a small technology store. "Our position is Observation Post Charlie," Kim said, studying the coordinates Hayes had provided. "Elevation 4,200 feet, overlooking the main approach route from the east." Elena examined the map location. OP Charlie was positioned nearly 3,000 meters from the crash site, with potential shooting lanes that extended even further into the mountains. If hostile forces approached from certain directions, they'd be engaging targets at distances that push the absolute limits of long-range marksmanship. "Alina," Kim said quietly as they prepared to deploy, "I know things have been tense between us, but this is real. If you've got some special technique or knowledge that could help, now's the time to use it." Alina shouldered her rifle case and met Kim's eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect those people." The helicopter insertion was rough, with mountain winds buffeting the aircraft as it approached the drop-off point. Alina and Kim rappelled into a rocky clearing just as the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon. Charlie was a natural hide site among granite boulders that provided excellent concealment while offering clear sight lines across the valley below. Alina could see the smoke rising from the crash site, a dark column against the lightning sky that marked where 47 people waited for rescue. Immediately began setting up her advanced equipment, a computerized rifle system with integrated weather monitoring, ballistic calculation, and range-finding capabilities. The setup process took nearly 20 minutes as she calibrated various electronic systems. Alina assembled her grandfather's rifle in less than 5 minutes, then spent time studying the terrain through her simple 2.5x scope. The visibility was excellent despite the early hour, and she could clearly identify multiple approach routes that hostile forces might use. "Contact," Kim reported into her radio after scanning the area with her electronic optics. "I've got movement approximately 2,800 meters northeast of the crash site. Multiple personnel moving in tactical formation." Alina swung her rifle toward the indicated area. Through her basic scope, she could barely make out tiny figures moving among the rocks and vegetation. At this distance, they appeared as little more than dark spots against the mountainside. "I count at least 12 individuals," Kim continued, her voice tight with tension. "They're armed and moving directly toward the crash site." Alina studied the approaching figures through her scope. At 2,800 meters, they were well beyond the effective range most experts would consider possible for her World War II rifle. Even with modern ammunition, the ballistic trajectory would require precise calculations that her simple scope couldn't provide. Kim was frantically inputting data into her ballistic computer, trying to develop firing solutions for the extreme range, wind speed varying between 15 and 22 miles per hour, temperature 42 degrees, humidity 60%, she muttered. "This is at the absolute limit of what my system can calculate." Alina watched the hostile forces continue their approach toward the crash site. In 30 minutes, maybe less, they would be in position to threaten the survivors. The math was simple and brutal. Someone needed to stop them, and they were the only shooters in position to make the attempt. "Kim, what's your maximum effective range with that rifle?" Kim looked up from her computer. "Under perfect conditions, maybe 2,200 meters. At this distance, with these environmental factors, I'm not confident I can make accurate hits." Alina studied the approaching figures again. They were still moving in tactical formation, taking advantage of terrain features for concealment. Professional soldiers, not amateurs. They would reach the effective weapons range of the crash site within 20 minutes. "Alina," Kim said urgently, "we need to call for support. Request immediate helicopter gunship assistance." Alina keyed her radio. "Control. OP Charlie. We have multiple hostiles approaching the crash site from the northeast. Request immediate air support." The response crackled back immediately. "OP Charlie, negative on air support. Weather conditions are still too dangerous for helicopter operations. You are authorized to engage if targets present an imminent threat to survivors." Alina felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. 47 lives depended on stopping an armed force at a distance that most experts would consider impossible for her equipment. Kim attempted her first shot, using her computer-calculated solution for the 2,800-meter engagement. Alina watched through her scope as the bullet impacted dozens of meters short of the target area. kicking up a small dust cloud that revealed just how challenging the distance truly was. "Fuck," Kim cursed, adjusting her scope settings. "The ballistic computation isn't accounting for all the variables at this range." Elena studied the terrain carefully, reading wind patterns from vegetation movement at multiple distances. Her grandfather had taught her to see the entire battlefield as a system, understanding how atmospheric conditions varied across long shooting corridors. The hostile forces had paused their advance, apparently having spotted Kim's bullet impact. They were now moving more cautiously, using terrain features for better concealment. Elena could see them spreading out, making themselves harder targets while continuing their approach toward the crash site. "They know we're here," Elena said. "Quietly, we don't have much time." Kim fired again, this time with a different ballistic solution. The impact was closer, but still well off target. At this extreme range, even small errors in calculation resulted in misses measured in meters rather than inches. Elena made her own calculations, not with computers or electronic devices, but using techniques her grandfather had learned in combat 70 years earlier. She observed mirage patterns that revealed air density changes, studied vegetation movement that indicates wind direction at various distances, and estimated the trajectory adjustments needed for her specific rifle and ammunition combination. Lead hostile figure was now approximately 2,600 meters away, clearly visible through Elena's scope as he directed his team's advance. Elena could see that he carried professional military equipment and moved with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. Elena settled behind her rifle, controlling her breathing as her grandfather had taught her. The target appeared impossibly small through her 2.5x scope, a tiny figure in a vast landscape. Every instinct told her the shot was beyond her weapon's capabilities, but 47 lives hung in the balance, and Elena Rodriguez had been preparing for this moment her entire life. She exhaled slowly, feeling her heartbeat settle into the rhythm she'd learned as a child in the Colorado mountains. At the natural pause between breaths, when her body was perfectly still, Elena squeezed the trigger, the rifle cracked, and 2,600 meters away, the lead hostile figure dropped. The effect was immediate and decisive. The remaining hostile forces, seeing their leader eliminated by what seemed like an impossible shot, broke contact and began withdrawing rapidly back up the mountainside. "Jesus Christ," Kim whispered, staring at Elena in amazement. "How did you make that shot?" Elena was already tracking the retreating figures through her scope, ensuring they continued their withdrawal. "My grandfather taught me that distance is just another variable to account for, not a limitation to accept." The radio crackled with communications from other observation posts, all reporting that hostile forces in their sectors were also withdrawing. Elena's shot had apparently convinced the entire militia group that the crash site was too well defended to assault. 2 hours later, as rescue helicopters finally arrived to evacuate the survivors, Elena packed her grandfather's rifle with hands that showed no trace of tremor. She just made the longest confirmed kill shot in her military career, saving 47 lives with a rifle that most experts considered obsolete. But she knew that the real test was just beginning. Her impossible shot would raise even more questions about her equipment and methods, questions that might prove harder to answer than any enemy she'd ever faced. The silence in the debriefing room was deafening. Elena sat across from a panel of senior officers, ballistics experts, and military historians who had been flown in specifically to understand what had happened at Observation Post Charlie. On the table between them lay her grandfather's rifle, now the subject of intense scientific scrutiny. Colonel Patricia Hendricks, the panel's senior officer, held a detailed ballistics report that seemed to defy everything the military understood about long-range precision shooting. Sergeant Rodriguez, according to multiple witness accounts and GPS verification, you engaged a target at 2,647 meters, using a rifle manufactured in 1943. The ballistic experts tell me this should be mathematically impossible. Elena looked around. The room had faces that ranged from skeptical to amazed. Technical Sergeant Collins sat in the corner, his investigation suddenly seeming trivial compared to what had occurred during the rescue mission. "Ma'am, the shot was difficult, but not impossible. My grandfather taught me techniques that account for variables modern ballistic computers sometimes miss." Dr. Marcus Webb, a civilian ballistics expert from Aberdeen Proving Ground, leaned forward. "Sergeant, I've spent 30 years studying long-range marksmanship. The equipment you're using lacks the precision tolerances necessary for accuracy at that distance. The scope magnification alone should limit effective range to approximately 800 meters. Elena had spent the past 3 days preparing for this moment, knowing that her rescue mission performance would either vindicate her abilities or result in even more intensive scrutiny. She'd made a decision that would change everything. "Dr. Webb, may I ask what you know about Miguel Rodriguez, my grandfather?" Colonel Hendricks consulted her files. Master Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, Congressional Medal of Honor recipient, 217 confirmed eliminations in the Pacific Theater. Exceptional soldier, but I'm not sure how that relates to current ballistic realities. Elena stood and approached the table where her grandfather's rifle lay disassembled for analysis. "Colonel, what if I told you that my grandfather's official record was incomplete? That he was involved in classified operations that developed techniques still not fully understood by modern military science?" The room stirred with interest. Elena had their attention now, but she knew the next few minutes would determine whether she was believed or dismissed as delusional. 3 days ago, I received a secure communication from the Department of Defense Historical Research Division. They've been tracking my performance here and cross-referencing it with recently declassified documents from World War II. Elena pulled out her phone and displayed an encrypted message. "My grandfather wasn't just a sniper, Colonel. He was part of an experimental program called Project Precision, a classified effort to develop extreme long-range shooting techniques, using modified equipment and unconventional training methods." Dr. Webb looked skeptical. "Sergeant, there's no record of any such program in the historical literature." "Because it remained classified until last week," Elena replied. "The techniques my grandfather developed were considered too sensitive for general military knowledge. They involved understanding atmospheric conditions, terrain effects, and weapon behavior in ways that went far beyond standard military training." Colonel Hendricks was reading the message on Elena's phone, her expression growing more serious. "This appears to be legitimate DOD correspondence. Dr. Webb, can you verify this information?" While Webb made phone calls to confirm Elena's claims, she continued her explanation. "My grandfather spent years after the war refining these techniques, teaching them to only a few selected individuals. I'm the 3rd generation to learn methods that were developed specifically for extreme-range precision shooting." Lieutenant Kim, who had been present for Elena's impossible shot, spoke up from her position near the door. "Colonel, I witnessed Sergeant Rodriguez make that shot. I've never seen anything like it. Her technique is completely different from anything we're taught in modern sniper schools." Elena moved to a whiteboard and began sketching diagrams that illustrated her grandfather's approach to long-range shooting. Modern ballistic computers are excellent for standard conditions, but they're based on mathematical models that make certain assumptions about atmospheric behavior. My grandfather's techniques account for microclimates, terrain-induced wind effects, and temperature variations that standard computers don't consider. Dr. Webb returned from his phone calls, his expression transformed. "Colonel, I've just spoken with the Historical Research Division. Project Precision was indeed a classified program during and after World War II. The techniques developed were considered so advanced that they were restricted to a very small number of personnel." The revelation rippled through the room like an electric current. Elena could see minds changing as the panel realized they weren't dealing with equipment modifications or unauthorized techniques, but with legitimately classified military knowledge that had been passed down through family tradition. Furthermore, Webb continued, the division is requesting that Sergeant Rodriguez be debriefed about her knowledge of these techniques. They believe she may possess training methods that were thought to be lost when the program was discontinued. Elena felt a mixture of vindication and apprehension. Her family's secrets were about to become the focus of intense military interest, potentially changing not just her own career, but the entire approach to long-range marksmanship training. Colonel Hendricks closed her files and looked directly at Elena. Sergeant Rodriguez, it appears we owe you an apology. And more importantly, we need to understand exactly what you know and how it can benefit our current sniper programs. 6 weeks later, Elena stood before a packed auditorium at Fort Benning, home of the Army Sniper School. The audience included not just military personnel, but also law enforcement snipers, competitive shooters, and ballistics experts from around the world. Word of her techniques had spread rapidly through professional shooting communities. The formal ceremony began with Colonel Hendricks reading Elena's commendation for the rescue mission, for extraordinary marksmanship under combat conditions, resulting in the protection of 47 military personnel and the successful completion of a critical rescue operation. Sergeant Elena Rodriguez is hereby awarded the Distinguished Service Medal. The applause was thunderous, but Elena knew the real significance of this moment went far beyond personal recognition. On the table beside the podium sat her grandfather's rifle, no longer viewed as an obsolete museum piece, but as a precision instrument that had challenged fundamental assumptions about modern military capabilities. More importantly, Colonel Hendricks continued, Sergeant Rodriguez has agreed to share her knowledge with the military shooting community, ensuring that techniques developed through Project Precision will benefit future generations of marksmen. Elena approached the podium, looking out at faces that had transformed from skeptical to respectful over the past month and a half. Many of the competitors from Fort Braxton were in attendance, including Captain Morrison, whose expression showed genuine admiration rather than the hostility she'd grown accustomed to. 6 weeks ago, many of you believed that this rifle was obsolete, Elena began, gesturing toward her grandfather's Springfield. You weren't wrong to think that, by conventional standards, it should have been outclassed by modern technology decades ago. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. But what we learned is that conventional standards don't always account for unconventional knowledge. My grandfather and the other soldiers in Project Precision developed techniques that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible in their era. Elena clicked to her first slide, showing declassified documents from the 1940s. Project Precision wasn't just about building better rifles. It was about understanding the science of long-range shooting in ways that went far beyond existing military knowledge. The program developed methods for reading atmospheric conditions, calculating bullet flight paths, and achieving accuracy that seemed impossible to contemporary experts. Dr. Webb, now a collaborator rather than a skeptic, stood to address the audience. In the past month, I've had the opportunity to study Sergeant Rodriguez's techniques extensively. What she's demonstrated challenges our fundamental understanding of what's achievable with so-called primitive equipment. Elena advanced to her next slide, showing comparison data between modern ballistic computers and her grandfather's manual calculation methods. The key insight is that technology should enhance human skill, not replace it. Modern computers are excellent tools, but they're based on standardized models that can't account for every variable encountered in real-world shooting conditions. Captain Morrison raised his hand from the audience. Sergeant Rodriguez, are you suggesting that our modern equipment is actually limiting our capabilities? Elena considered the question carefully. Not limiting, Captain, but potentially creating dependencies that reduce our ability to adapt to unusual conditions. My grandfather's techniques require understanding the fundamental physics of long-range shooting in ways that allow for real-time adjustments based on observation rather than computation. Lieutenant Kim stood up. Elena, I was with you during the rescue mission. Can you explain how you read those wind conditions at 2,600 meters? My electronic systems couldn't provide accurate data at that range. Elena moved to a detailed terrain map of the rescue site. The key is understanding that atmospheric conditions aren't uniform across long shooting corridors. Wind speed and direction can vary significantly at different distances, especially in mountainous terrain. She pointed to specific locations on the map. My grandfather taught me to read these variations by observing vegetation movement, dust patterns, and heat mirage effects at multiple points between the shooter and target. This provides a three-dimensional understanding of atmospheric conditions that standard wind meters can't capture. The audience was taking extensive notes as Elena explained techniques that had been developed in secret 70 years earlier. She demonstrated her grandfather's methods for judging distance without rangefinders, calculating bullet drop using manual techniques, and making real-time adjustments based on environmental observation. The most important lesson, Elena concluded, is that precision shooting is as much art as science. Technology can provide data, but interpreting that data effectively requires experience, intuition, and understanding that can only be developed through extensive practice. The question and answer session lasted for nearly 2 hours, with shooting experts from various disciplines seeking to understand how precision techniques could be integrated with modern training methods. Elena found herself at the center of a revolution in thinking about long-range marksmanship. Master Sergeant Hayes, who had driven down from Fort Braxton specifically for the presentation, approached Elena after the formal session concluded. Rodriguez, I've been training snipers for 3 decades, and I've never seen anything like what you've demonstrated. I owe you an apology for doubting your abilities. Elena shook his hand warmly. Sergeant, your skepticism was reasonable given the information you had. My grandfather always said that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Hayes smiled. Well, saving 47 lives with a single shot at 2,600 meters constitutes pretty extraordinary evidence. The Army wants to establish a new training program based on your techniques. Are you interested in helping develop the curriculum? Elena looked around the auditorium, where groups of military and law enforcement professionals were still discussing the implications of what they'd learned. Her grandfather's knowledge was about to transform how an entire generation of marksmen approached their craft. Sergeant, I'd be honored to help ensure these techniques aren't lost again. 1 year later, Elena stood at the graduation ceremony for the first class of the Advanced Precision Marksmanship Program at Fort Benning. 24 students from various military branches and federal law enforcement agencies had completed the intensive 6-month course that combined Project Precision techniques with modern technology. The results had exceeded everyone's expectations. Graduates were achieving accuracy levels that surpassed conventional training programs while demonstrating greater adaptability to challenging environmental conditions. More importantly, they'd learned to view their equipment as tools rather than crutches, developing the fundamental skills necessary to succeed even when technology failed. Elena watched with pride as the graduates received their certificates, knowing that each of them carried forward knowledge that had nearly been lost to history. Among the graduating class were several of her former competitors from Fort Braxton, including Lieutenant Kim, who had become one of the program's most dedicated students. Elena, Kim said as she approached after the ceremony, I wanted to thank you for everything you've taught us. 6 months ago, I thought expensive equipment was the key to precision shooting. Now I understand that equipment is only as good as the person using it. Elena smiled, remembering Kim's initial skepticism about her ancient rifle. The most valuable lesson my grandfather taught me was that true expertise comes from understanding your tools completely, not from relying on them to compensate for lack of knowledge. Colonel Hendricks joined their conversation, carrying a folder that Elena recognized as containing the program's latest performance statistics. Elena, I thought, you'd want to see the final numbers from this class. Average accuracy improvement of 43% over conventional training methods, with even greater improvements in challenging environmental conditions. The statistics were impressive, but Elena knew the real measure of success would come when these graduates faced real-world situations where lives depended on their skills. The techniques that had saved 47 people during the rescue mission were now part of standard military training, ensuring that future generations would have every possible advantage. More importantly, Colonel Hendricks continued, we've received requests from allied militaries to share these techniques. Your grandfather's knowledge is going to have a global impact on precision marksmanship training. Elena felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that Miguel Rodriguez's legacy would continue far beyond his original expectations. The techniques he'd developed in secret during World War II were now part of an international effort to enhance military and law enforcement capabilities. Dr. Webb approached their group, carrying a leather-bound volume that Elena immediately recognized. Elena, I wanted to return this to you. We've completed our analysis of your grandfather's training manual and incorporated the relevant techniques into our official documentation. Elena accepted her grandfather's original notebook, feeling the weight of history in her hands. The pages contain not just technical knowledge, but also philosophical insights about courage, dedication, and the responsibility that came with exceptional skill. Dr. Webb, what did you conclude about the techniques? Are they as revolutionary as we thought? Webb nodded enthusiastically. More so, actually. Your grandfather and his colleagues were developing concepts that were decades ahead of their time. Some of their insights about atmospheric physics and ballistic behavior are only now being validated by modern scientific research. Elena opened the notebook to her favorite passage, one that had guided her through every challenge she'd faced. The weapon doesn't make the warrior makes the weapon. Technology should serve skill, not replace it. Captain Morrison, now a devoted advocate of Project Precision Techniques, joined their growing group. Elena, I've been thinking about our conversation last year when I questioned your equipment choice. I realize now that I was asking the wrong question. What do you mean? Elena asked. I was asking how you could succeed with primitive equipment, instead of asking what I could learn from your success. My expensive rifle made me think I didn't need to develop fundamental skills because technology would compensate for my limitations. Elena appreciated Morrison's honesty. The equipment itself was never the issue, Captain. Any tool can be effective if you understand how to use it properly. My grandfather's rifle succeeded because I'd spent years learning its capabilities and limitations. As the graduation reception continued around them, Elena found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she'd been mocked and investigated for using techniques that others couldn't understand. Today, those same techniques were being taught to elite marksmen around the world. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez, Elena's new commanding officer, approached with news that would define the next phase of her career. Elena, I've just received word from the Pentagon. They want you to lead a joint international training initiative to share Project Precision Techniques with allied forces. It's a prestigious assignment that could define the future of military marksmanship training. Elena looked around at the graduates who were now carrying forward her grandfather's knowledge, at the instructors who had learned to value wisdom over technology, and at the colleagues who had transformed from skeptics into advocates. The ancient rifle that had once been ridiculed was now displayed in the base museum as a symbol of how innovation and tradition could work together. Colonel Martinez, I accept the assignment. My grandfather always said that knowledge shared is knowledge multiplied. That evening, Elena sat alone in her quarters, cleaning her grandfather's rifle with the same methodical care she'd shown every day for the past year. The weapon that had challenged assumptions about modern military capabilities had become the foundation for a new approach to precision marksmanship training. On her desk lay letters from students around the world who had learned Project Precision. Techniques from law enforcement officers who had achieved previously impossible shots, and from military historians who were still uncovering the full scope of her grandfather's wartime innovations. But the most meaningful item was a simple photograph. Her grandfather in his dress uniform, standing beside a young Elena as she held his rifle for the first time. On the back, in his familiar handwriting, were the words that had shaped her entire philosophy. For Elena, May, you always remember that the greatest victories come not from having the best equipment, but from being the best version of yourself, Elena. Rodriguez had started as a woman trying to prove that ancient knowledge could compete with modern technology. She'd ended up proving something far more important, that true expertise transcended the tools being used, and that the most valuable innovations often came from understanding the past, rather than simply embracing the future. The rifle that had once been mocked as obsolete was now the inspiration for training programs that would influence military marksmanship for generations to come. And somewhere in the mountains of Colorado, Elena knew her grandfather would be proud that his techniques had found their way back to where they belonged, in the hands of warriors who understood that skill, courage, and dedication would always matter more than the price tag on their equipment. The shot that saved 47 lives had been just the beginning. The real victory was ensuring that the knowledge behind that shot would never be lost again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.